Hey, everybody. Welcome to the best in true crime podcasting. This is True Crime Tuesday, and we've got a great interview lined up for you today. Now, I want to make a mention. You'll get the entire interview. The only segment of today's show you won't hear is our Dumb Crimes, Stupid Criminals. Why? Because that's under Stitcher Premium. We want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to hear these remarkable interviews of these incredible true crime stories. But for only $5 a month, you can subscribe to Stitcher Premium. That'll give you the entire episode. That includes the entire interview you're about to hear, plus Dumb Crimes, Stupid Criminals, and every episode of Darkness Radio, the best in paranormal podcasting. All 1,000+ episodes commercial free. And if that's still not enough reason for you to want to subscribe, you don't just get True Crime Tuesday and Darkness Radio, which, let's face it, for $5 a month, that's pretty valuable. You get every other show underneath the Stitcher umbrella. That means hundreds of thousands of hours of your favorite type of podcast programming commercial free. Nobody got time for commercials. So if you're interested, then make sure you go subscribe now to Stitcher Premium. Use code word Darkness Radio, all one word, Darkness Radio, for some deep discounts for an entire year's savings. Go do that right now. Take advantage of the special and be able to listen to Darkness Radio, True Crime Tuesday, and all of the other amazing programs across Stitcher's platform. Go subscribe right now. Sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of True Crime Tuesday. Hello and welcome. You're tuned into the best in true crime talk radio. This is True Crime Tuesday. I'm your host, Dave Schrader, along with me, Tim Dennis. Tim, I am broadcasting from an undisclosed location. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I know where it is because I'm here. I'm just not disclosing it to you because, you know, we need a break. That's it, Tim. That's it. We just need to be separated once in a while.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Hey, I want to remind people this Friday, September 10th, on Discovery Plus, The Curse of Lizzie Borden, True Crime and the Paranormal. I'm on the show along with Chris Fleming, Sam Beltrusis, an actual relative of Lizzie Borden, and Luann Jolly, a paranormal investigator with some really compelling EVP. For those of you that are true crime aficionados and not familiar with the lingo of the paranormal sect, that's electronic voice phenomena. And it is it's recording of disembodied voices, but we go in and have a very interesting and I think very powerful experience. So make sure you check it out. That's this Friday on Discovery Plus. Watch it often, share it with friends, neighbors, relatives, turn it on and put it on loop so it continues to play all day long in the background while you're home. Is that asking too much, Jim? Is that really asking too much?
No, I don't believe so. No.
I didn't think so either.
No.
Let's get to it. We got Dumb Crime, Stupid Criminals coming up in a little bit, but there's a new book, The Wheels of Justice, the true story of a 27-year battle to convict my sister's killer. The author, Renee Fehr, is with us today. Renee, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
What a remarkable and heartbreaking story. It was, I understand, you know, living through it is one thing. Was it tough to sit down and put pen to paper and kind of have to relive all of this again for yourself?
Yes, I had no idea that I would cry so many tears again, you know, now 30 years later, writing the book. But in hindsight, it was some of the best therapy I think I've ever had.
So it was kind of a cathartic measure for you as well, then.
It was. It very much was.
Well, the book, The Wheels of Justice, is equal parts the story of a monstrous killer, a harrowing look at domestic violence, and an inspirational story of a family that wouldn't quit until justice prevailed. Renee, talk to us about your sister. Tell me about her.
Sheryl was the oldest of 4 girls. Our parents, Victor and Phyllis Fehr, my dad's a farmer. We lived in Farmer City, Illinois, and my mom was a nurse. We grew up kind of with a Norman Rockwell type of life. We lived out on the farm and played outdoors and played with some of the neighbors. And my sister Sheryl was a sweet soul. Sometimes I refer to her as she's probably one of those angels on earth. And there was not an animal that she couldn't tame or nurse back to health. And it didn't matter if it was a bird that fell out of a nest or a raccoon that fell out of the tree. And she nursed them all and turned them into pets. And that just speaks volumes of her. And it's no surprise that she went on then to become a nurse. And not only a nurse, but a nurse in the neonatal unit of a hospital.
Right.
So her specialty was to nurse babies that were, not healthy or didn't start out their life on the best footing. So she was doing what she did when she was growing up, and then she turned it into nursing baby humans as she grew older. And that really speaks volumes of her. That is who she was.
Were you a pretty tight-knit family?
Extremely tight-knit, because, this was a time when, we lived out in the country, and on a good day, we got 3 channels. So, and it was before video games and anything else. So we played with each other and, ate breakfast together. Didn't always have lunch together, but we always had dinner together. So we were a really close family.
Now, Sheryl, the type of people she surrounded herself with, was it indicative of her caring nature and wanting to fix and help people?
Yes, I can't deny that. She definitely was what we would refer to now as an enabler. She was so sweet, and she saw goodness in everyone. And if there was badness in them, or something, less than desirable, she was accepting of it. And I do believe she thought she could fix it. She could fix people, just like she could fix animals and babies. I truly think she believed she could do that. Now, a lot of her friends, her girlfriends, though,
Mm-hmm.
were super sweet people too. And she had, and still has, just a ton of really good girlfriends. And since I've written this book and it's started to be publicized a bit, it's amazing to me how many contacts in just a couple of days I've already gotten from people who have stories to share about Sheryl that I've never heard before. And it's super heart-wrenching.
When she was growing up and dating, did she have a type that she was attracted to?
See, that's what's interesting. She never really dated. She was a firstborn, and so she was shy and super compliant. She didn't cause my parents any issues. That was my sister and I later. She was just sweet and caring and participated in school activities, but no boys. I don't ever remember any boys taking an interest in her, or her really taking an interest in any other boys until Greg came along. And, I think that people like Greg recognize and pry on people like Sheryl. And he took an interest in her, and she, she didn't know any better. We don't know what we don't know. And she didn't have any experience, and she liked it. It felt good, to have some attention paid to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that, especially, back in the late 80s, early 90s, we had this trajectory of our lives, right? We were going to go to high school, and if you were fortunate and driven, you went on to college and you got married. And when you got married and you had babies. And I know that's what she wanted to do. And her ultimate goal was to get married and have babies. And Greg's the first person she ever really dated, and the only person she dated.
When did she meet him, I guess, would be my next question then for you. At what age?
Yeah, Farmer City is back then it was a town of about 1,800 people, and it had consolidated with another town of Mansfield, which is where Greg was from. Mansfield was about 800 people. And we started combining schools by junior high. So in junior high, we would have gone to Mansfield, and then all Mansfield people came to Farmer City for high school. So he was 1 or 2 years older than Sheryl. So they would have crossed paths probably in junior high, but she really met him in high school.
Your sister sounds a lot like my oldest daughter, Kayla. She was, she was very compliant. She was very nurturing and mothering towards my other children, and just a sweetheart of a person, and not always the best judge of character. And again, I think because of insecurities, she was willing to align herself with probably not the best people, wanting to fit in, wanting to have a boyfriend. And I remember one of the first times she had a date. Tim and I were hosting a scary movie at the theater, and there to introduce it. And somebody asked, Dave, what's the scariest experience you ever had? And I said, it's happening right now. My daughter's here on her first date. And we kind of laughed it off. But on the way home, as we're driving, I watch this kid. My daughter's, he's kind of slumped up against the door. My daughter slumped up against him. He's got his hand over her shoulder and then slowly starts trying to edge his hand down her shirt with me driving the car. And I pointed out to her and I said, hey, if your fingers move another inch, I'm going to break them off and throw them out the window. And then I said to my daughter, I said, any guy that's this big an idiot to try to feel you up in the car with your dad driving in mirror range and isn't thinking, has absolutely no respect for you, me, or anybody. And to my daughter's credit, when we got out of the car, he asked for a hug. She said, no, thanks, and don't call me again. And that was kind of the end of that. But, she had enough wherewithal to realize, yeah, that's probably not a good sign. Were there signs from the beginning that you think she overlooked, or was he one of those narcissistic sociopaths who were really good at kind of covering their tracks around other people?
He thought he was one of those, but there were signs. He was not always, we would say, he wasn't nice to Sheryl. He would make fun of her and tease her, but it wasn't in a fun and playful way. It was at her expense. And it got to the point where he would do it to the point where she ended up in tears. Well, that's not okay. And it didn't matter what she put on or makeup or new clothes or what she did. It was never good enough. And he never had a problem voicing that in front of whoever was around. It didn't matter. Friends, family. He was very quick to point out her flaws. And
did friends and family step up and say, hey, that's not okay? Or were people afraid to upset her?
We didn't. And part of that, I would like to think if this happened today, it would be different. But you have to remember, this was what I refer to as pre-OJ. And domestic violence wasn't talked about. It was, what happened in the home stayed in the home. And people said it wasn't anybody else's business. I hate to admit this, but my sisters, Lisa and I, we talked about, we don't like it. We don't even really like him. But this is our sister. And if she chooses him, then we will respect her. That was our mentality back then. We since, we made a pact at her funeral that we would never allow that to happen again. If any of us ever ended up with someone or our family members did, and we thought there was a problem, we made a pact to each other that we would speak up. And somebody else didn't have to like it, but we would speak up because it's not okay. And we didn't. But I don't know that a lot of people did back then.
Yeah, even today in post OJ, right? I mean, you get to that position where you're like, well, I don't know what their dynamic is. And I know I've caught myself doing it. My wife and I have been out with a few people where I watch kind of abusive behavior, and I'll tell her on the way home, am I being hypersensitive here, or was that guy kind of a dick? You know what he was doing? And she's like, yeah, but again, I don't know if, is this their way? Do they take shots at one another? Do they do this? I don't know if they had a fight before they came. Was he still kind of irritated about that? It's weird how we try to justify what's going on. Of course, we've talked on the show a lot about my friend that was murdered along with two of her children, and the guilt that I've dealt with over the years, because when I met that boyfriend, you could just sense there was something off, and it was not good. And I never spoke up. I never said, "Are you safe? Are you okay?" I never did that because, again, we're always so concerned about hurting somebody's feelings that sometimes we forget what the long game could be. And sometimes just asking that question may have been the release valve, right? And again, I'm not putting anything on you or your family. We do what we do because we care, because we don't want to interfere or make ourselves seem nosy or pushy.
Right.
But we learn from these mistakes, right? We see these flaws. And now I know I've certainly learned to speak up when I see things that I don't find comfortable to be around. And I ask the person now, are you okay? Are you safe? You don't have to settle with this person. If you're lonely, for God's sakes, I'll introduce you to, 10 other guys or 10 other girls. Don't be in this relationship if it's just a state of loneliness. But it is strange, the nurturing, mothering feeling for most women. They will hang in it so long because they think their love will be the one to help fix or put this person back on the right path or help them to learn trust. And it's kind of a dangerous position, right? Because women are expected to be their nurturers. They're the ones expected to tolerate and put up with things. And we I don't know, in school, I think instead of learning how to make the perfect omelet and, home ec class, we should be learning about the dynamics of relationships and what's safe and what isn't.
Oh, I totally agree with you. And that's one of my passions right now is Sheryl didn't know what she didn't know. And she hadn't experienced it. If you haven't experienced it, you don't understand. I think we need to talk with our children at a very young age on what is a healthy versus an unhealthy relationship. And we don't do that. Schools don't teach that. And our society, I think today makes it even worse, right? Because it's okay for people to tease other people or take pot shots at people, or especially with social media where you don't have to face anyone. And it's at other people's expense. And you don't even realize what that does to people who have a little lack of self-confidence and just want to fit in. I don't know. I think that there's a lot we need to change or at least teach our young people about today.
It's scary because then you have to take into consideration, right? There is no one right answer. You take into consideration the different belief systems and everything that, is now part of the great melting pot that is our country.
Yes.
And I'm sure that that's part of the problem is how do you speak up and say, hey, this is okay, this is not okay, when there are many cultures where it is still a very male-dominated culture, where the women are brought up to follow a certain set of rules. And if you start interfering, does that open up legalities to, hey, you're messing with our culture. You're messing with the way that we do things. And that's not okay. It's a strange world we live in. But, folks, maybe share this episode with your children. Share it with somebody that that might be in a relationship that is unhealthy so that they can start to look for some of these signs and maybe realize that, people not speaking up isn't because they don't care. It's because they don't know what the proper etiquette is anymore. And how do you do these things without seeming overbearing or a busybody?
Right.
And we've watched that. Sometimes you speak up and what happens, and I'm not going to just put this all on men. I know a few men who have been in this position as well, where they are the subservient aspect of the relationship. And then once the friend's partner gets wind of it, they start alienating you from them and isolating the victim. And then that makes the victim even more accessible and prone to danger because now they've lost their friends, they've lost their family, and they hold on even more to this dysfunctional character in their life because they don't want to be alone. And now they don't even feel like they're worthy of the people in their lives or the person that tells them that they love them.
Yes, you are so right. It's crazy. Domestic violence is a very complicated situation, and it's not the same for everybody. And it's so hard to understand. I know after Sheryl was killed, I was angry with her. I was so mad. I mean, I was 25 years old, but I was so mad at her because I didn't understand why she allowed that to happen, why she married him, why she didn't leave him sooner. It took me a lot of years and a lot of educating myself to understand that she wasn't doing it on purpose. That is a type of brainwashing that they get involved in. And then there's so many tentacles. It's so hard. It's not just easy to walk away, especially if you become financially dependent on them or you have children together. All that starts to get so much more complicated. I know I went to counseling afterwards, and the counselor actually said to me, I think the best thing I can do for you is to put you in a domestic violence group. All these women are victims, and I'll allow you to come, if you will, pretend that you too are a victim, and maybe you'll understand. And I went to several of those sessions, and boy, did I have my eyes opened. Because back then, too, I was a bit embarrassed. I thought that these types of things happen to people that allowed it to happen to them, or maybe weren't as sophisticated, not as popular, not as wealthy, you name it. And when I went to that group session and I saw other business women in that group who were also victims, it's the first time I realized that, domestic violence does not discriminate. It can happen to anyone. It doesn't matter what your race, your religion, your socioeconomic status. It can happen to anyone.
Well, talk to us again now, kind of in a reset mode, about this relationship. When she met him, did he come around right away? Were you guys privy to their relationship from the get-go, or had he already kind of sunk his claws in before you guys even had a chance to get to know him?
No, he came around, and for my sister Lisa and I, so the second and I was the third in line, it was fun because he often brought other boys with him, and we were interested in that and wanted to be involved in, other activities, and certainly would have, wanted to date and watch what was going on with our older sister. And he was kind of fun, he drove a gold fast Trans Am, and he, would come hot rodding into the driveway, and it's like, oh, that's cool. We thought it was kind of cool. And he did. In the beginning, I think he worked hard to endear us to him. He was very macho, also had big trucks with big tires and, wanted to go mudding and do those kinds of things. But he wanted us to like him and be sucked in too, because I think that deepened his claws into Sheryl. And then she saw that and she's like, oh, they like him, and I think she probably started early on saying, it's not him, it's me. He's angry at me because I did this or I didn't do this. And he very much did that to her. I mean, everything was her fault. And it was the cycle. You saw it, and we've got letters from when she was in nurses training that he would leave in a rage and a storm, and then he would write her a letter and say, if you hadn't have done this, I wouldn't have gotten angry, or I wouldn't have left, but it
trying to validate his actions while demeaning hers.
Yes. And so it was always her fault.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's tough because, right, I've got to say, I've been in relationships myself where the person that you're with stirs the pot and then wonders why you react the way you do. And then when you point it out, they're like, oh, you always make me the bad guy. And it leaves you, and I'm sure it leaves your sister, left her on the borderline of, am I the crazy one here? Even though you know that this doesn't seem right or healthy, you're sometimes left scratching your head thinking, maybe I am the one that's nuts. It's gaslighting to the, nth degree, because you start to question reality and how you're feeling. And once you do that, you become prone to all types of psychological and mental and physical abuse, because again, you find yourself in the situation of wondering, God, do I deserve this? Am I that horrible a person? Should I have been more? And they're really adept at knowing that you're a nurturer. They're adept at knowing that they've got you. They've got you. And they know that. That's what's so scary. So you do see that. But then when you do try to point it out, if you've got one of those people in your life, you'll realize there's never that moment of, and they were all guilty of blowing up at somebody and then trying to put it off on them. That's because we don't want to feel that guilt for what we just did. I try to go out of my way to, if something happens at home, that I'll go back and go, hey, listen, I'm sorry. I've been in a bad mood and that wasn't meant for you. You didn't deserve that. I apologize. And you try to take those steps. But in most cases, that's not what what the bad guys do and gals, right, that are part of these abusive relationships. They never really take ownership for their own indecencies.
Right. And, there's an author out there by the name of Lundy Bancroft, and he's written a lot. He has been involved in counseling the abusers. And he writes about, he doesn't think you can fix them or change them. Even as a professional, he says that. And so for just the run-of-the-mill person who may be a little lacking some self-confidence or something, they're never going to fix them or change these people. I mean, it's rare. It's really rare. But yet they hang on to that they can do that. And it makes it that much worse for them to try and get out of, because they don't want to give up. Sheryl would have never given up on her baby bunny or baby bird or whatever it was she rescued. She just wouldn't give up. She could do it. She could fix them. She could make it okay again. But there is no fixing most of these types of abusers. The only fix is to get away and stay away. And what I like to talk about with young people is the earlier you recognize they're this type of person, the easier it is to get away. And you need to figure out these red flags and get away. Because you're not going to change them and you're not going to fix them. You're going to get sucked in, and then it's harder and harder to get away from them.
Well, that's part of the problem too, is you get overwhelmed by these people that end up being the abusers, right? Because you become the center focus of their world until they win you over. And then once that game has been played, they kind of lose interest and will pull away, and then the abuse starts. And at that time, you're so emotionally vested in trying to make things work, you start feeling like maybe you did do something wrong. It is such a convoluted, twisted reality to relationships, and not all relationships, of course. There are plenty of good ones. But in these cases, you get so wrapped up in feeling important to this person and feeling loved by this person. And then when something goes wrong, you're kind of left feeling like, well, maybe it is my fault.
Yeah.
That's it. And that is a really tough position to be in, but be aware, right? I mean, I think one of the best pieces of advice I've ever had is when people tell you who they are, believe them. And if they're telling you up front with these red flag signals, you just can't look them over. But I also, it's hard because you don't want to breed that level of paranoia in people either, where then they're looking for any little flaw to pull away, because that's your own insecurity. There's, sadly no solid answer. But if you see the way they treat other people, the disrespect that they show other people, you can expect that if they're talking that way about people they quote unquote love, and you see the way they treat their family members, friends, and so on, it might be a good indicator to what your eventual relationship will look like. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I mean, there are many that will say that, being an abuser isn't mental illness. Now, some abusers do have a mental illness, but abuse grows out of entitlement. And, they're entitled. They expect it. They demand it. It was probably lived, learned, and encouraged. Now some of them are, schizophrenic or sociopaths or whatever, but that's not the main cause.
So now the family is kind of vested in this guy. They like him. He's cool. He's he's different than what you're all used to, right? So that's kind of exciting as well. She starts dating. Does she, is this guy just more mentally abusive, physically abusive, or is there kind of a strange hybridization of both?
Well, back then, he was mentally abusive. There's no doubt about it. And we saw it. We just didn't call it out. I didn't know until much later that he was physically abusive, even back then. We didn't know that. We didn't know that until she started to get out, and she started little by little to confide things in us. There are some of her girlfriends who, again, hindsight's 2020, will tell you that there were, bruises and marks on her that they saw. Now we would recognize them probably as definite signs of abuse, but they didn't. And nobody called it out. But one of her dear friends tells me now that when Sheryl got married, she got married in the summer, but she wore a high neck to her dress, which was a little unusual because it's hot. But she did that because of the bruises that she knew she'd have on her neck. That's horrifying.
It is. It is. My wife, her first big high school relationship was extremely mentally and physically abusive. And he would go out of his way to hit her and hurt her in places it wouldn't be seen.
Yes.
He left her face alone. He left the extremities alone, but the places that were covered where he liked to leave his marks. And my wife is one of the strongest people I know, physically and mentally. And I've asked her repeatedly, how did you put up with that? Why would you put up with that? And here's a big indicator. Sometimes folks, when you think, God, she's just so stupid, why is she staying with this guy? And you talk to them and it doesn't help when you point out, well, you're just stupid. If you're going to stay in this, then you're going to get what you deserve, which I've heard people give that advice to abused people. Mm-hmm. You're just going to get what you deserve. You don't realize that sometimes they're staying because they have a fear that they're going to be killed. And that is what my wife went through. This animal would tell her, if you leave me, I'll kill you, or I'll hurt your family, or I'll kill us both. And that's a heavy burden to live with. Very heavy burden to live with. And we have a survival instinct. We don't want to die. So it's worth getting punched every now and again in order to stay alive than it is to leave and possibly incur the wrath of what this person's going to do to you.
Right. And they believe them. And I mean, they know that they're capable of doing these terrible things. So, and they're embarrassed. I think there's a bit of embarrassment that goes with it. I got into this, I can get out of it, and I'll keep everybody safe, and maybe I deserve it. Maybe I did do this. It's so complicated.
When you look back now with the gift of 2020 hindsight, how many times did you see things that you just kind of ignored or kind of raised your eyebrow, but didn't question? Or was a lot of it hidden until the end?
No, there were signs. I mean, here's another example. He was an animal abuser. That's a huge one. I had a cat that went missing, And it was a favorite one. We had cats were a dime a dozen on the farm, but this one was a favorite one that went missing. We looked for that cat everywhere. One of Greg's friends was out one day, and I'm still looking for this cat. And he finally pulls me aside and he says, "Stop looking for the cat. The cat is dead." And I'm like, "What do you mean the cat is dead?" He said, "Greg shot it. It walked across his car and it pissed him off. So he shot it and threw it out in the pasture." And I'm like,
oh my God.
Oh my God, that was my pet cat. Yeah. Yeah. And here's another one. I was once visiting and, we walked on eggshells around Sheryl and Greg. But I was visiting, holding her third brand new baby. I was home from law school, and he comes running in the back door, like kind of sweaty hot. He'd been out mowing the yard, but all excited. And I thought, oh, here comes Greg. Maybe there's going to be some redeeming quality. And he wants the oldest boy, to come out with him because he found a bunny nest. And I thought, oh, how sweet. That's so cute. He's going to show him the baby bunnies. And he said in the next breath, "I want you to ride on the mower with me when I run it over." I'm like, oh my God. You came in to get your 5-year-old so that he could be with you when you ran over a bunny nest and spewed out bunny parts everywhere? I mean, that's a sign of a pretty sick guy.
Very sick. Folks, if you're listening to this and you find yourself in a situation like this and you don't know where to go and what to do, check thehotline.org. As a matter of fact, their website is set up to erase or protect. So if anybody checks your internet history, it will be protected and not kept. You can also call 1-800-799-SAFE. That's 1-800-799-SAFE. 7233. 1-800-799-7233. There's help out there. You can text, you can chat, or you can call and speak to somebody who can help you and maybe give you the resources to get away from this abusive relationship safely. Investigate it, research it, and protect yourself. And I know that's sometimes easier said than done, especially if there are children involved. But you also have to realize that in allowing this to continue around your children, what example is that setting for them? Will they believe that this just must be okay? Will it continue a cycle that allows them to become abusers or the abused? And I know that's more to put on your plate, more to consider that may make you feel guilty. But your life and the lives of the people around you are important, and you deserve better. You may feel lonely and that you don't deserve anything more because the person has made you feel that way. But please don't buy into that rhetoric. Don't buy into that mindset. You are important. Make that call, 1-800-799-SAFE. We're here with our guest, Renee Fehr. The book is called The Wheels of Justice, the true story of a 27-year battle to convict my sister's killer. And we are speaking with our guest. The book is out and available right now. We've got a link for it in today's program guide. Renee has introduced us to her sister, Sheryl, a caring, loving individual, somebody that would want to help, somebody that would want to give answers to people in need. And she quickly became the victim of a gentleman by the name of Gregory Houser. Physically, mentally, this man was broken, and he was putting it on Sheryl because she was strong and was trying to take it and wanted to be the one to fix him, to make him feel better, to make him feel secure. How long did these two date, or how long were these two together, I guess I should say, Renee, before the death of your sister?
They were actually married for 7 years, and they probably dated, let's see, she went through nurses training, college they probably dated like 5 years before they got married. So they were together quite a while. And 7 years of marriage with 3 children. And in the end, when she started to confide in me, I asked her, because again, I had anger and I didn't understand everything. I'm like, why did you keep having babies? Why did you bring babies into the world? I knew, I mean, that's all she wanted to do. She loved babies. But you know what she said to me? She said, he's nice to me when I'm pregnant. Which is, you know, interesting that I took that to mean that the abuse was less or perhaps not physical when she was pregnant. But he liked that. That was, you know, he was also one of these crude people who would talk about, you know, I got bread in the basket and, you know, all these sayings about he liked his wife barefoot and pregnant. But I think that was a sign of control over her. And she wasn't his equal or his partner. She was his property, you know, and he
Right.
very much treated her like that.
Heartbreaking to hear the story, a gentle reminder of all those that we have come into contact with in our lives that are currently going through this or have in the past. And he was nice to her when she was pregnant. So she tried to find ways to keep him happy, tried to find ways to keep things on the even. And that's even more heartbreaking to this. Did the abuse spill over to the children as well, or was she always the brunt and main focus?
That's an interesting question. When she finally contacted me and I started to help her, and I asked her a lot, you know, is he hurting the boys? She would never answer the question. And she would say things like, I can handle him. I can take this. You know, she later confessed to me that he could do whatever he wanted to do to her and she could handle it. That's what she always said, I can handle it. But she said when he started hurting my babies, I knew I couldn't allow that to happen. So I believe that is one of the major reasons she got the courage to finally leave him and do what she did. I believe that abuse, she was starting to see signs of abuse toward her babies, and she was not going to allow that to happen. And she did confess to me, you know, she'd tell you different people bits and pieces just to kind of gauge your reaction, I think. She said to me once, you know, he spanked the oldest one who got out of bed to get a drink of water, you know, for getting out of bed until he peed his pants. Well, that must be a pretty hard spanking, you know? And she said things like that. Or the one thing that was appalling to me is she said she came home one day and he didn't watch his own children. He was babysitting them. And he had the oldest one in a kitchen chair with his feet and his arms duct taped to the chair legs. You know, probably a form of punishment. He tried to slough it off a little bit that they were playing, but who does that? Right? I mean, who does that? You don't do that.
Yeah. Not obviously this man is completely unbalanced. I don't want to give. This is a tough question to ask because I don't want to give this man excuses as to his actions. But what can you tell us about Gregory Houser's life and upbringing? Was this something that was beaten into him? Was this something that, you know, he was a product of what he saw? And I say that cautiously because I know there are women listening to the show and men who have been abused. And they're, you know, just because of your past, that does not define. You still have the choice to not be violent. You still have the choice to not follow in the footsteps of what you know is wrong. But was this more a learned behavior as opposed to a just an inherently evil person?
I wish I knew the answer to that question. And it is one that I have asked myself and others who, in the community and around. And I don't know the answer to that question. But I ask, what happened to him? I've been to plenty of counseling in my life, and, what happened to him? What trauma was in his life that, he got produced this way? I don't know. I don't know.
Please, speaking to the victims out there right now, please don't just make that okay because you saw that, well, God, that's the way his father treated his mother. That's the way the mother treated the father. That's the way the mother treated the children. That's the way the father treated the children. What else do they know? But I love them, and I'm going to try to stick with them and make life better. That just continues the cycle. But better me than somebody else because I'm strong and I can be the one to help. Or you could end up dead. And you have to watch out. There's a certain line when how much is too much? How long do you try and fail at helping someone or fixing someone? They have to want to change. They have to, and legitimately, not just because they're afraid you're going to call the cops, not because they're afraid you're going to press charges, but because they realize that this is a sickness and this is wrong. And unfortunately, very few people come to that conclusion. Tim and I had very dear friends of ours. God, Tim, can you believe it's been 6 years since Mark and Debbie Constantino?
Yeah, it doesn't feel like it at all.
Our friends ended in a murder-suicide. It was a double murder-suicide. I don't want to forget the other victim involved. But we saw things. We witnessed things. And they tried to act like it was part of their shtick for their live presentations, the way they would needle each other and talk. And you sit there and you feel guilt afterwards. You wonder, had I said something, had I pointed something out, would it have made a difference? Would it have changed anything? Or would I have just become one of the enemies of the state for even having acknowledged it? It's heartbreaking, right? To see this unfold. And, they were just friends of ours, friends that we saw a couple times a year. I can't imagine what it's like to have somebody in your life that, you love, care for, see all the time, and is an important, integral member of your family. Renee, that was it just like watching somebody being whittled down from a strong, mighty oak to a toothpick? Is that kind of what it was like watching Sheryl go through this?
Yes. And especially now, I look back at the pictures and stuff. And he took the smile off her face and the light out of her eyes. And you can see it. I see it now in those pictures. And here's another good example. If he came earlier on, he came to the holidays and did things and he would be involved. We all walked around him because everybody wanted him to be happy. He didn't want him to be unhappy or it was going to make everybody's life hell, especially Sheryl's. And then all of a sudden he would announce, "It's time to go." And he would get up and go towards the door. The rest of us would scurry around like little church mice, trying to gather up the children and their things and get Sheryl out the door before he got pissed off, and that's what we did. We did it. I look back and I'm like, why didn't I just tell that guy to go take a hike? No, but we tried. We fell into it too and just tried not to. We knew that if she didn't get out before he got pissed off with all the things, that she was going to pay for it. Now, back then, we didn't know that she would physically pay for it. We thought he'd just yell at her and rant and rave and scream and carry on, and it would be a scene in front of the kids. She probably got beat over it too. But yeah, I feel terrible over that. And then but we didn't understand. We didn't know enough. I will tell you, if anybody else comes into my life these days and I see any of that happening, there will be side conversations because
right.
It's a sign. That's not okay.
And there's sometimes there's a price to pay for that. But in the long run, is that price important? I will tell you, I had a very sweet call, a friend of my daughter's who I never really cared for much. I thought she was trouble and wasn't fond of her, but I was letting my daughter have friends and make these choices. And I would point things out to her without shutting it down, because we know that sometimes in telling people you can't be with this person, it makes them want to be with them even more. I told her this person will reveal themselves to you. And the person did. But to their credit, they gave me a call and said, I want you to know what's going on with your daughter. And I don't want to cause trouble in her life. And this isn't a tattletale session, but I'm legitimately concerned for her safety. And I respect this girl. I may not like a lot of her personality. That was a hard phone call to make. She picked up the phone. She saw a problem and she called my daughter's, she called her friend's parents to discuss this situation. And that allowed me to address it. Had it not been addressed, I might have missed it and I could have lost my daughter. And that's important. But if you lose that friendship, I just tell people I would rather lose that friendship and keep my friend, sister, brother alive than to have sat silently by and wished I would have done something. And again, please understand, Renee, this is no slight on you. When you're in the thick of it, sometimes you don't see these things. But if you are strong and you realize how this can go, you're probably not going to save that person yourself by just hanging in and belittling the spouse or the person that they're with. But being strong and maybe helping other people to see it might behoove all of you. And then maybe together a collective voice might be helpful. But it has to be done with love and compassion. And we've all had those people in our lives that we look back at and think, God, if I would have made that call, if I would have sent an email, if I would have sent that text, would things be different? And they might have. And instead of wondering, maybe just do those things because it's the right thing to do. Not the easy thing to do, but the right thing to do. Because I'm sure that you and your sisters and brothers and parents have all gone through that cycle of grief and shame and remorse for not having done something else.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I didn't realize until the trial, and my dad testified, and he broke down and he cried. And he said that if he had just stayed with her that night, this wouldn't have happened. We all take a, responsibility for it, even though it really isn't our responsibility. But, we wished we'd done things differently, and certainly it wouldn't have mattered. It would, he had stayed there or not stayed there. Eventually, it probably would have happened. If she probably was never going to be free of him. I just can't imagine.
Right. Well, I know this will be incredibly difficult, and before you send emails, and Renee, again, I apologize. I'm not trying to put you on trial or your family for this. This is a difficult conversation to have. We can only have it with somebody that's lived it, somebody that's gone through this. I am not placing blame anywhere, right? Ultimately, the decision was Sheryl's to stay in a relationship that was not conducive to her or her children. It's in having these rough conversations that might, and I know this is why you wrote this book and why you're vocal about it, it might help save somebody else's life.
Yes.
So, I know because we have a very compassionate, empathetic audience, many people will think I'm on the attack of you or your family for not doing more. No, I've been there. I've missed the signs or ignored the signs in fear of losing or upsetting the apple cart. And man, you sometimes you just have to do those things. And we learn it, unfortunately, the hardest way, by loss.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I understand that you're not attacking me, and I don't mind talking about it, because by sharing my story, I hope that it helps somebody else, or it makes somebody do something that maybe they otherwise wouldn't have done or said. And I just hope to make a difference in somebody else's life. Let's go to her last day, maybe even the last week leading up to it.
Can you start us there and tell us what happened, how it unfolded?
From the time it was like 4th of July that she had contacted me and wanted an attorney referral. Not unusual. I was the attorney in the family, and people often called me and asked me for this or that and for various friends, and found out it was from her, for her, which was astounding to me in and of itself, and is a long story. But she, from that moment, the beginning of July until she was found dead October 5th, it was intense. Intense because of the abuse and the cycle. It was shorter and worse all the time. And he was losing control because she wanted out. And she was afraid, and she was crying, and she was calling my parents, and she was calling me, and she was, talking to an attorney. And she asked for the divorce. He filed first, of course, control, even though he begged her to come back and stay, blah, blah, blah. He got the first restraining order because in defending herself, she was abusing him. The story goes on and on. 3 weeks before she was killed, the judge had entered an order where the children stayed in the home and they rotated in and out. So even though there were restraining orders in place, he still had them crossing each other's paths and living in the same home. So same access to keys and everything else. Again, not a real good understanding back then of domestic violence.
So she had started the separation. She had started the breaking away. That's an important aspect to note.
Yeah. Which is when you're probably in the most danger, and ended up, yes, that's when she was in the most danger. So her youngest had asthma, and he was in the house with the kids, and he had called her at work, and he always pulled on her heartstrings, right? The baby has asthma. Maybe you should stop by on your way home from work and check on him. And she's like, no, you're in the house. I'm not supposed to be there. It's okay. I won't say anything. I'm good. So she leaves her car running. She goes in the house to take care of the baby. The baby's asleep. And he leads her into the bedroom and has ropes tied to the headboard and forces her onto the bed, ties her up, puts pillows and blankets in her mouth, and starts to sexually assault her. And she's fighting and trying to get away. I know all of this because she was keeping a diary, a journal, at my request for the custody battle, and she wrote all this down in her own words. And she said, I saw the look in his eyes that night, and I knew he could kill me. But she talked him down. She struggled. She got away. You can see the intensity. She's running towards the door to get out. He grabs her. He bends her over the back of a couch, and he puts paper in front of her that says, I, Sheryl, agreed that we have consensual sex tonight. And he wants her to sign this paper. Bizarre, right? She does finally get away, runs to the neighbors, beats on their door. They open up the door, and there she is. And she's got bruises and blood where a rope had been across her mouth. She's terrified. They call the police. He's arrested again. This is now the second time he's been arrested. It was a battery charge before. And he's charged with aggravated criminal sexual assault. So those charges are pending. He's out on bail. Now, he doesn't want to go to jail, but they've now had a custody hearing, an emergency custody hearing, because he's now tried to kill her, and this is now documented. And the judge awards her sole custody of the children, sole possession of the home, and he only gets supervised visitation. So he can only see the children with Department of Children and Family Services person with him. And so she'd been so terrified of losing her kids. We had a little celebration because I'm like, Sheryl, it's over with. Sometimes something bad has to happen before something good can happen. And he's done it. He's lost it. He is not taking your babies away from him. The court is not going to give your babies to him, which is all she was concerned about. So she's now feeling pretty good. And she starts cleaning the house, and she's making preparations to get a different vehicle because her car takes too much gas. She needs to look for an apartment because she can't afford to live in her home. She puts a bed on layaway because she doesn't want to have anything to do with this marital bed. It's terrifying to her. She does all of these things, and this is all happening. And then she, like I said, she starts to get a little bit cocky because she's feeling good. She just, the night before she was found dead, she'd been at my mom and dad's house and picked up the kids. And she told my mom, I'm going to take my maiden name back. And that's just really going to burn him. She was kind of like, yeah, that's really going to make him mad. But she didn't show up for work that next morning. And her coworkers, again, she'd only told different people bits and pieces, but there'd been enough, and she'd been in the emergency room several times as the patient, that the word had gotten out. And so they knew she was in a pretty bad situation. When she didn't show up for her shift on time, one of the nurses called her house and nobody answered. And so they hung up, called back, and after it rang and rang, a young child answered the phone, and the nurse recognized it as being her oldest son. And she said, where's your mommy? And he says, I don't know. And she said, well, put down the phone. Don't hang up on me. Put it down. Go find your mommy. Bring her back to the phone, or come back and tell me where she's at. And the nurse says he was gone for what seemed like hours. And he finally comes back to the phone and was almost proud of himself. He says, I found my mommy. She's asleep in the garage with a rope around her neck, and I can't wake her up.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. And then the nurse kept him on the phone and got another nurse there, and they dispatched 911. Now, this is very interesting. He was a volunteer fireman and an EMT. And that night, he had stayed with his grandparents, who he had not stayed with since he was 11. He testified to that in depositions. He stayed with them. They were elderly, hard of hearing. And he and his grandfather were at the firehouse washing their truck at 6 a.m. in the morning, washing a personal vehicle, when the call came in. And he was one of the first responders to the scene.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. With another person who is a personal friend of mine, who says, I'll never forget when we're speeding out to the scene, having to tell him to put the freaking truck in the right gear. He didn't have it in the right gear even. It was in a low gear, and he was trying to speed out there, and he's like, put it in the right gear. So he gets out there. His feet step onto the ground, and by now a neighbor has also come down who had tried to help Sheryl before and was also on the volunteer fire department, and some other people were showing. And he steps out and he says, what did she do now? Well, the call never came in as a call assisting Sheryl. It just came in as an emergency at the residence, right? And mind you, they've got 3 kind of wild hyena little boys. Things happen. And one of them had asthma. But he wants to know what she's done now. And that just set off other people who had been involved and knew that he was, their situation was not good. And so they kept him away from the house. But yeah, she was left in the garage to.
Did they keep him separated so that he didn't? Obviously, this is an investigation, and there's going to be cross-pollination of evidence because of it, as it is. But did police or anybody think to keep him separated from the crime scene?
Yes, that was done. Now, I was in Florida. I was an attorney in Florida at the time. And others will tell me that they kept him back and away. It's fascinating because news travels fast. Back then, people had those radio scanners and they listened to calls and things. But his mother arrived on the scene shortly after the call. And his mother arrived on the scene with Greg's attorney. Now, I always found that to be odd, right? Why does she arrive on the scene of something that has happened at the house that Sheryl's in possession of with Greg's attorney?
But well, I would say this, perhaps because of their colored past and the court issues and domestic abuse issues and things that had played into a part in the past, it may have just been hey, it's better to be safe than sorry. Let's have the attorney with in case anything goes on so he can oversee this and protect. I'm giving the benefit of the doubt there, but that would be my thought for this. Obviously, to us on the outside, it looks glaringly obvious that there's guilt involved and they're trying to cover their asses. But could it be that this is a tragedy of suicide or something that took place and you want to make sure that because again, the parents are going to have their child's best interest in mind.
Oh, absolutely. And then from that moment on, they started the rhetoric of, oh, poor Sheryl, she had postpartum depression, and it's such a shame she committed suicide. I mean, that was the position they took, and they still, I think, would stick to that story.
All right, so now they've got parents involved, attorneys involved. How obviously he is associated with this tragedy, but they're trying to wave it off as postpartum depression. How did your family feel from the beginning? Did you believe that at first, and then things started to reveal themselves, or were you never believers in postpartum depression? Did you know from the start this bastard was involved in her death?
Oh, there was no question in my mind. And in fact, it had gotten so bad, probably a week before she was killed, I called her attorney, which she'd give me permission to talk to him. And I said, I know you think I'm saying this because I'm her sister, but he's going to kill her. What are you going to do about it? I mean, I was not nice about it. I had talked to my secretary. Oh my God, this guy's going to kill her. My mother and I had cried to each other that, oh my God, he's going to kill her. I mean, it was just that intense. And we were saying that. People who knew her and knew the situation, oh my God, he's going to kill her. I was at work in my office in Florida, sitting at my desk. I look up because I feel something odd, and it's my husband standing in my doorway in shorts and a t-shirt. He's supposed to be at work. I'm like, what the hell are you doing here? And I looked up and saw him, and I could see that there had been tears running down his face. And I literally screamed, he killed her, didn't he? He killed her. I told people he was going to kill her, and he did. And he just shook his head. I mean, that's how adamant I was and knew. And we all believed it from right then. And I don't know too many people that didn't think that. But it was, the scene had been staged to look like a suicide, and there needed to be an investigation. And it was, in a small county. His family was involved in the county sheriff's department. They called in the Illinois State Police. The detective who, I believe did the best job he could do and came back and testified at the trial. And I have no ill feelings against him or anyone involved, but it was his first case. The DNA evidence wasn't quite the same as back then. I always will believe that one of the biggest factors in not having done sooner was the fact that after she was killed, those aggravated criminal sexual assault charges were pending. And I was adamant with the state's attorney, you have to take that to trial. I don't care that she's dead. You have to take that to trial. It was going to trial. He deserves to go to trial for that too. And there was a lot of publicity. It got moved out of county. There were pretrial motions. They didn't want the jury to hear that she was dead. Well, she's not at the trial. Somebody has to say why she's not at the trial.
Right. Exactly.
And the judge finally determines, the other side was arguing it would be more prejudicial than probative, which is the standard. But he does determine that a statement can be read to the jury that the victim's not there because she's deceased. But that was all. But he was acquitted. After a week's trial, he was acquitted of those charges. And I personally believe it devastated the state's attorney. Devastated him. It devastated my family. We're like, oh my God. We all know what he'd done to her. You know, she had testified to it at her criminal or her divorce hearing, emergency hearing for custody of the kids. And yet they let him off. He got off. And boy, that just put a feather in his cap, and he just gloated over that. And
what was their explanation for how he got off? Was it a technicality? Was it, I mean, this just sounds twisted. Was it because of his stature in the community as somebody who helps and a first responder, and, you know, them kind of painting him more as a hero as opposed to the villain that he truly was?
I don't know why he got off, and I don't know if it wasn't done or it couldn't have been done back then. I just don't know. But I don't ever remember getting any feedback from the jury or understanding why he was acquitted. That state's attorney's still around. I should ask him if he knows that. But I know he personally was just devastated. And he would say to me, because I called all the time, and you know, what's happening? I started investigating the case myself and providing him with the information. And we were working on custody of the kids, and all that goes on. And he would say to me, Renee, I know he did it, but there's no statute of limitations on murder. And eventually somebody's going to talk. Somebody's going to break, because we always believed that there were two of his friends that knew or were involved in some way, maybe not in killing her, but in dropping him off or picking him up or doing something. We always believed there are two other people that have knowledge. And that's just what he would say to me. And I think he was, I think if I were him, I would be so upset with myself that, you know, he got off. Gosh, you can't try this guy for murder when everybody in the community knows he did it, and the chance of him getting off, that would have been even more devastating. So you wait for evidence. Now, in hindsight, maybe it was the right thing. You know, maybe it was all timing and godlike, because DNA evidence changed, and different people came around, and the times were very different. And when we tried him in 2017, he didn't get off. They convicted him in less than 2 hours. And then we did talk to the jury afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Well, before we jump into that, lead us up to 2017. What broke? What shifted and changed to give this opening to reevaluate this case?
I give 100% of the credit to the tide changing on the case to a young woman named Dana Rhodes. She was the state's attorney in Piatt County at the time. When she was in college at Illinois State University, she already knew she wanted to someday be a lawyer, and she knew she wanted to be maybe the state's attorney or maybe even a judge in Piatt County. She had family who had gone down that path, and that was her dream and her goal. She remembers standing in her kitchen after my sister was murdered and listening to her parents talk about my sister's case. And she remembers them talking about that poor girl didn't kill herself. Everybody was talking about it, and she didn't kill herself. And Dana vowed at that time that if nobody ever solved that case, when she got in there to be state's attorney, she would solve it. And she did. She became state's attorney, and she started looking at that case and those files. She spent years looking at it, unknown to us. We had kind of given up on it. And there were different times when, you know, somebody would call us and say, oh, there's maybe a break in the case. You want to do this, you want to do that. And then we'd get all excited, and then nothing would happen. And we had told my parents, and my parents would be devastated. And it's like, geez, you just can't do that to yourself. And so Dana had called my sister, who lived in the same town, and said, I am looking at this case again. And we had these conversations with, really, is she really going to do anything? Or is this just all the hype for nothing? And then my poor parents, can they even take this, that we get all worked up, and then can they go through the trial? What if he's not convicted? Can they withstand it? Can all of us take it? We'd have those conversations, even though we knew, or I knew, it's up to the state whether they pursue a case or not. But then one day Dana called me and she said, I am pursuing this case. I've been looking at the evidence for a long time. I'm really making great headway, but I need DNA evidence from Sheryl's 3 boys. I'm like, what? Yeah, there was a spot of blood on her nightgown that could not be identified as to whose blood it was. And that was Dana's last stumbling block before she wanted to take the case to trial, because it could be what, the defense would clasp onto and say was the reasonable doubt, right? The killer actually left a blood spot on her and nobody's found him. He's still out there. And we don't know who it is because it doesn't match anybody's blood. And she wanted the boys' DNA because, they're 3 young boys. They could have had a bloody knee or a elbow or a nose or whatever. And she was hoping maybe it was a drop of their blood, and then she could rule that out. So we had never told the boys that we thought their dad killed their mom all these years. And people are like, well, that's ridiculous. How can you have not have done that? Well, here's how you cannot have done that. They're 6, 3, and 15 months, and they have to go visit their father because he's not been convicted, nor arrested, nor nothing. And he now has visitation rights. In fact, we fought him for custody. That's another long story, but he was going to have custody. But you can't tell 3 young boys that we think your dad murdered your mother, but hey, have a nice weekend. And then it's, at what age would you tell them? When they're 10, when they're 13, when they're 16, when they're 18, when they get married? I mean, we had the conversations all the time. And it's like, oh, and why would you tell them? Because what are you going to tell them? We believe this, but nobody else did anything about it ever. So, it made it very, very difficult. But it was then when they wanted their DNA that I called each of them and told them that we had always believed their father killed their mother, and the state's attorney was actually looking at it and considering bringing charges, and she wanted their DNA. So, can you say they lived in a small community and they didn't know it? No, I think they probably would have had to have known it, but it was, I'll admit, it was very dysfunctional. We never talked about it. And really to this day, they don't talk about it. It's not always easy.
Sometimes you live with that beast with the hopes that it's just a lie or a misunderstanding. Right. I can only imagine. Now, if he had already stood trial before, how could they go back after him and it not be a case of double jeopardy?
He stood trial on the first time he tried to kill her, on the aggravated criminal sexual assault when he tied her to the bed and she got away. He never was charged with murder and didn't stand trial for murder. So there were 2 different events.
All right. Now, 2017 rolls around. You've got a bulldog district attorney that's going to re-examine this case. And how does that unfold?
Well, it was amazing because Dana's this teeny tiny, very young looking state's attorney, and she's got an assistant state's attorney who's a woman, and they hire a special prosecutor to help who's another woman. And so we have 3 women state's attorneys and assistant state's attorneys going after him, and he hates women anyway. So it was just, there was a little bit of satisfaction from me just from that standpoint. But they got all their evidence ready to go, kind of told us what was going to go down. They arrested him, charged him, and started going forward. going forward with the case to bring him all the way through the pretrial motions to the trial. And at the trial, obtained his conviction. One thing they did before they arrested him, which was, I think, ingenious of Dana Rhodes, was they had a coroner's inquest. It is a proceeding in Illinois that really has anything to do with the criminal system. It really has to do with the coroner deciding what category of death goes on the death certificate. Is it murder or homicide, suicide, natural causes, or undetermined? And they convened this coroner's jury, and originally it was convened in Sheryl's case back in I don't know if it happened in 90 or 91, probably 91, and it was undetermined on her death certificate. That always bothered me and my family immensely because it wasn't undetermined. We knew what happened to her. But Dana decided to reconvene the coroner's jury.
It's actually good, right? Because leaving it undetermined is much easier to work with than definitively saying suicide or accidental homicide or accidental murder or whatever, overdose. If they leave it undetermined, that leaves a wiggle room for a possible case in the future.
And I believe the state's attorney in charge at that time, I think that was part of his strategy. I do believe that was it, but it was always upsetting to my parents. But she then had this ingenious idea to reconvene a coroner's jury again. And now that she had other evidence, could we now say it was something other than being undetermined? And it would give her the opportunity to have like a real mock trial of this case. So she convened a coroner's jury, and we, had a little trial. He testified. They called Greg. They called other people. We're going to get more sworn testimony out there, inconsistent after all these years. And the coroner's jury came back and said it was a homicide. And that's all she needed. And then that's when she pressed the charges and moved forward.
Unbelievable. All right. So once the ball gets going, and I know we have very little time left together, but once that ball got rolling, and that court case came to be, how quick did this proceed and how quickly was he convicted?
There's timelines, and for a case to be taken, the accused has rights, that he doesn't have to sit behind jail. He's actually the one that asked for them to be continued a couple different times to prepare his case. But it all came to trial I would say like a year from the time the coroner's jury was reconvened and then his arrest, and then he came to trial. It was supposed to be, I think, within 9 months, and it probably ended up being about 15 months that he came to trial. And in a week, we put on the case, and the jury went out, and they came back in less than 2 hours that it was murder.
Wow. With all that they had, were there still things that were uncovered in the second trial that surprised you?
Yes. Yeah.
Is that something you can tease a little bit for us? I certainly don't want you to give away major chunks of the book here, because I do want, and again, folks, we have a link for the book on today's show, The Wheels of Justice, the true story of a 27-year battle to convict my sister's killer. Renee Fehr, Brian Whitney are the co-authors on this book. There's a link, so make sure you buy it, rate it, review the book, and share it with others, along with this episode of True Crime Tuesday. What were some of the surprises that came out even 17 years later, or 27 years later, I should say?
Greg accused her of a lot of things, drug abuse, her own abuse, and he accused her of having an affair, which we always just laughed off. It came out in the trial that she had an affair, and I was surprised. Now, at the trial, it came out that it was just a one-time encounter, but that was a little surprising. And there were other
Well, it is and it isn't, right? I mean, somebody that's being abused and somebody gives them positive attention or affection, you can understand why they would break for that, why they would accept that.
Yes. Yeah. And I was actually happy. Even if it was one time, which is what was testified at the trial, I'm like, well, maybe she had one sexual encounter that wasn't just a rape, because every other time it was brutal. And she chronicled it in her journal. The other thing was he'd been involved with other women, and they came to his sentencing hearing and testified to their terror and his abuse. And they all supported us. And that was surprising. Not surprising that he was abusing other people he ultimately hooked up with, but that they would come and testify to it and support us. It was pretty amazing.
You're not alone out there, folks. There are people that can help, and there are people that are willing to listen and will believe you. 1-800-799-SAFE. That's 1-800-799-7233. You can also visit their website, thehotline.org. It can help you identify abuse, plan for safety, and how to get the support that you need. You can live chat with them. You can text them, and start your text by texting 88788. That's 88788 for help. If you want to make that call, 1-800-799-7233. Their website is available and will help you to protect your anonymity and protect you so that the abusive person in your life does not know that you visited that website. And what you can expect, every contact to the hotline is personal. Some people who reach out identify as survivors of abuse, some as concerned friends or family members, and some as abusive partners seeking to change themselves. While every contact is unique, their advocates are guided by the hotline's consent and ethics policy and will emphasize several key points throughout your conversation. So if you want insights on how to help somebody who's in this situation, you can call. If you are in that situation, you can call. If you are the abuser and want to break that cycle, you can call 1-800-799-7233. I know this is hard to do, but Renee, I applaud the heroic nature putting this story down so that maybe it will help save other people. Maybe it'll help somebody who is an abuser identify themselves as such and stop. Maybe it will help somebody in an abusive relationship or somebody who has yet to have their first relationship know what to look for. So thank you very much for your courageous efforts in putting this book out there. I believe it's going to help change people.
Thank you. And thank you for allowing me to tell my story. And Sheryl would love this. She would not have wanted to die in vain. And if she knows that she could help somebody else, that's what she did. That's what she'd want to do.
And it's good to know that Gregory Houser is, although there's no real way to say he's paying for the murder because nothing will truly ever equate to that. It's good to know that there was some justice served. How long is he supposed to serve?
Actually, it is 4 years today that he was sentenced to 54 years behind bars, and the judge painstakingly explained that he calculated all good time and other time that could be credited to him, and he made sure that he would spend 1 year behind bars for every year he walked free after killing Sheryl. So he has to serve 27 years.
Well, and if there's true justice, he'll serve more than that or never see the light of day again. The Wheels of Justice, the true story of a 27-year battle to convict my sister's killer, is out and available in paperback right now. Make sure you go check it out. We have a link for it on today's program guide. For those of you that are subscribers through the Stitcher Premium, we're about to launch into Dumb Crime, Stupid Criminals. For those of you that are not subscribers to Stitcher Premium, thank you for tuning in and spending some time with us. And if you'd like to become a Stitcher Premium member, it's $5 a month. And that gives you access to True Crime Tuesday, all of our Darkness Radio shows and archives, commercial free, and it gives you access to all of the other great programming under Stitcher Premium's umbrella. So go subscribe now. $5 a month gives you hundreds of thousands of hours of fantastic programming, commercial free. If you don't mind commercials, then you can stay just listening the way you are, but you won't get to hear our premium content, which is Dumb Crime, Stupid Criminals. We hope you enjoyed today's program of True Crime Tuesday. And remember, if you'd like the full episode with the Dumb Crime Stupid Criminals aspect, all you have to do is go over and subscribe now for Stitcher Premium. Use code word Darkness Radio, all one word, to get some deep discount savings for your 1-year subscription. And it will give you access to all of our archives from Darkness Radio. There's over 1,000 episodes up and available, and more being added constantly. You get all of the episodes of True Crime Tuesday, and you get all of the other great programs that are part of Stitcher. Hundreds of thousands of hours of programming for $5 a month, commercial free. You can't beat that, so don't even try. Go subscribe now, and remember to use keyword Darkness Radio for those key savings.